Hey, welcome to Mind Games. I'm so excited that you've chosen to join us for the next 6 weeks, where our goal is to help you win the battle in your minds the way you can live a happier and healthier life. I know in today's day and age, it's really difficult to find people that fit that description. It's why a topic like this is so popular. It's something that I need, it's something that you need, and we probably all know people in our lives that need to live happier and healthier lives by winning the battle in their minds. In this series, we're going to have two main sources. First and foremost, the Bible. The Bible has a lot to say about the way that we think and the effect that it has on our minds. In fact, I think what we're going to see, especially in this introductory lesson today, is that the Bible has been really far advanced on saying things that modern neuroscience is showing us today. Our other source is going to be a book called Bad Thoughts by Judah Smith, who's a pastor, and Les Parrott, who is a psychologist. Judah is going to bring the scriptural side into the talk, and Les is going to bring more of the scientific, counseling, psychologist side into it. And the two together really pack a powerful 1-2 punch that I think is going to give us a robust view of the topic of winning the battle in our minds and thinking better thoughts. Now, something like Mind Games is very personal to me because of my own personal struggles for the last decade with mental health issues. I have been on multiple different medications for anxiety and depression. I've seen a counselor now going on for almost 10 years, and it's been quite the struggle in my life. And so when I read the book Bad Thoughts, I knew this was something that many people, including myself, were really going to need. And so I hope that this ends up being a blessing to you. The whole basis of the book Bad Thoughts, though, the main idea that the authors are going to drive home, and what we're going to drive home in this series, is actually something that my counselor has been talking to me about for 10 years. And it's simply this one thought. It's, I am what I think. I am what I think. Now, if you're thinking, that doesn't sound very pastoral, or that doesn't sound very scriptural, where does faith come into all of this? Well, first and foremost, let's go and see what the scriptures actually have to say, to see if the Bible really does say, I am what I think. Is that a biblical concept? Well, Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7 says, for as he thinks in his heart, so he is. Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. It's very important for us to remember, in the Hebrew understanding of the word heart, we're not talking about the organ that lives inside of our chest, but we were talking about the center of the person, the mind, will, and emotion. So it's, in essence, in 423, it's saying that if you guard your innermost person, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, that it actually is what determines the rest of your life. In Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 2, the Apostle Paul says, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. As Christians, God wants to transform us. And the way he does that, Paul says, is by changing the way that you think. And then in Philippians chapter 4, Paul again tells us this, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all that you've learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Paul here again says, if you want to experience peace, it begins by fixing your thoughts on the right things. And then finally, Jesus in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 45, says, the good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. So it seems to me that the scriptures are in agreement that yes, it is a biblical concept to say, I am what I think. Long before modern psychology, scripture taught that thoughts form character, direction, and identity. So our premise for this whole series and from the book is simply this: you are what you think. In this series, our goal is to identify the negative thought patterns that you have that are leading you to record levels of anxiety, worry, depression, isolation, self-harm, cynicism, and every other negative outcome that comes from a bad thought life. And we want to replace those negative thought patterns with something very basic and simple, but something that I believe has the power to override those bad thoughts. And just to clarify up front, I am a pastor. I believe in the Bible. I believe in faith and everything that comes along with that. When we say, I am what I think, and that this is the large majority of our problem, it doesn't mean that every single struggle is simply a mindset issue or that suffering is our own fault because of the way that we think. I do want to state from the beginning, I still believe Ephesians chapter 6, we have a spiritual enemy in the battle that we wage. It's not against flesh and blood, but against the unseen world. So there are spiritual forces that want to see you miserable and crumble. But that does not mean that the way that we think is not an important thing. In fact, I believe our thought life is one of the primary battlegrounds God wants to redeem. And that's why mind games is going to be so impactful in your life. So, where do we go from here? What makes it possible for us to have hope that we can actually rethink or retool the way that we think naturally? What makes the rewiring in us actually possible? Well, see, every single thought that we have sends a surge of electrical currents within our brain, releasing a shower of neurochemicals, and depending on the specific thought, this brain shower that happens when you think something, it either elevates your mood or depresses your mood. So what am I saying? It means that a single thought can actually change your mood. Perhaps you've experienced this before. And if you are experiencing any sort of physical pain in your body as well, this brain shower that takes place that elevates or depresses your mood can actually exacerbate even the physical pain that you are feeling in your body. Let me give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, of how a single thought can elevate or depress your mood. We've all received this text message before, and none of us like to get it. You get the text message from someone, and it says, "We need to talk." Now, when you receive that text message, what is it that you initially think? You probably begin to think, what have I done? What's going on? Something must be wrong. Immediately, our minds go negative. Your heart starts to race. Your hands get clammy. All because of that one simple text message made you think something negative. It's not actually the text message that made you feel that way. It's how you thought about the text message. I remember one counseling session, I was explaining something similar to my counselor, that when people say, I need to talk to you, that it freaks me out. As a pastor, this happens to me a lot on Sundays. Hey, I need to talk to you. And I go, oh no, what's wrong? And he said, Scott, have you ever thought for a moment that when someone says that they want to talk to you, that they could want something positive? That it could be a good thing? He said, what if someone came up and said they want to talk to you, and later that week they came to talk to you, and they wanted to give your church $1 million. And the whole week you sat there frustrated and flustered, wondering, oh my goodness, what's going on? How bad's it going to be? And it could have actually been a good thing the whole time. And so one thought can either elevate or depress our whole mood. So if our thoughts are so powerful, maybe the question becomes, why don't we just change the way that we think, so the way that then it will change our emotions? Well, the problem with that is everyone has actually unknowingly trained their brain with repetitive thoughts that eventually become ironclad. Like this is happening almost automatically. So your thoughts become so ingrained in you, they become so repetitive that they become ironclad. And so it's very difficult for us to change. It's almost as if our minds go on autopilot. It's almost we're thinking, wow, like where did that thought come from? This is great language for me as someone that has struggled with this for the last decade. I've been trying to figure out what it is that when something affects me emotionally, what was the thought that triggered that, and where did that thought come from? And so we need to trace back what that initial thought is to really get out of that pattern. Here's another example of what this might look like. If you text a friend and they don't immediately respond to you, your mind might immediately ask, did I do something wrong? That feels like a benign thought, but it's rooted in something much deeper and actually more destructive. What's happening is that your mind is conjuring up an irrational thought or in an unhealthy misbelief. And what happens is those unhealthy misbeliefs and irrational thoughts actually begin to shape who we become. And then the more that this happens, we actually end up sort of held captive. These autopilot thoughts that we have, if they're negative, hold you captive. And then what happens is this leads then to worry, depression, anxiety, because what happens in your mind is it doesn't seem like there's any alternative. It feels like this is just the way things are always going to be, and you end up stuck. In essence, we've been so unhealthy for so long, we didn't even realize that being healthy was possible. Because when we get caught in these autopilot thoughts and they are triggered almost automatically and we feel almost like a slave to these thoughts, the reason why that is that when we have that thought, again, we get a shower of those neurochemicals and our bodies actually get addicted to those neurochemicals that are related to those bad thoughts. So we've actually addicted ourselves to the bad feelings through being addicted to those neurochemicals. It reminds me a lot of the people of Israel in the Old Testament. God set them free from slavery, but they didn't know how to live as a free people. That's why they kept trying to go back. And that's why it was always like, well, it wasn't like this in Egypt. What they were experiencing was that freedom and healing and wholeness was much more difficult than when they were living as slaves. There's a reason why this is the way that it is for each and every one of us. There's actually a chain reaction that begins with our thoughts and actually determines the course of our life. That my counselor has actually been teaching this to me for almost a decade. I was always so focused on trying to change my actions or trying to change the way that I felt that he would always say, Scott, you're missing one key element, that it all begins with the way that you think. It all begins with the way that you think. It actually begins with thoughts. Your thoughts determine your feelings. Your feelings determine your actions determine your character, and your character actually determines your destiny. Maybe here we are at the beginning of a year. This is January when I'm recording this, and it's likely that a lot of us have different things that we're trying to accomplish this year. And for a lot of people, our New Year's resolutions end up being the same every year because we weren't successful in the year previous. And we go, why is it that when I set a goal, when I really want things to change, that I am so unsuccessful so often? Here's the little secret that we never think about when it comes to how we can change our lives. And it's this: willpower alone won't get the job done. Anybody ever try to change the way that you eat? How'd that go for you? For a while, you might be able to white knuckle it and really push yourself to doing a really restrictive diet or cutting this out or cutting that out. But if the mental side of it doesn't change, you ultimately fall back into the old unhelpful habits because willpower alone is not enough. Now, before we begin to think that we're talking about for the next couple of weeks simply the power of positive thinking, that's not what this is. Or some sort of new age mindfulness, or how you can manifest what you want in life by thinking the right things, or dream or vision boards, or any of these other things where you think, well, this is just going to be a lot of pat answers, or maybe just slogans from inspirational posters. That's not what we're talking about. The goal here actually is to get under the surface to actually give you something that could be transformative. And so it begins with this. Let's dive deeper. Consider this fact. The human brain is the only organ of the body that's essential for individual identity. This is why your brain is so important in the process of your overall well-being. Other organs like kidney, heart, liver, or lungs, you can actually receive a transplant of those items or of those organs, and you still remain you. But if scientists and medical professionals could crack the code on how to do brain transplants, everything about you would actually be a different you. This echoes this idea that your brain presides over who you are. The brain is in charge of who you are. And we've actually been stumbling over this idea for centuries. We already saw how the Bible spoke to it long ago, but consider some of these other brilliant thinkers who have come to the same conclusion. French philosopher René Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am." Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius said, "We become what we think." British author James Allen states, "You are today where your thoughts have brought you." And Bishop Edwards Steers, an Anglican minister, says that your thoughts are making you. All of these great thinkers echo one clear idea, that you really are what you think. You really are what you think. And we can see the idea isn't so new. We can see, though, through neuroscience over the past 20 years has really begun to tell us why this is the case. So the Bible was really far ahead. Some of these philosophers were really far ahead. And now over the last couple of decades, neuroscience is going, yeah, that's true. But now let us give you the reasoning or the rationale for why it's true. In fact, neuroscience over the last 2 decades has actually shown us that 90% of our well-being, for good or for bad, comes from our thought life. So 90% of how you feel and how you are doing comes down to the way that you think. In fact, the English poet John Milton put it like this. He said, "The mind is its own place, and it can make a heaven out of hell or a hell out of heaven." And so how you think determines so much about your life. Now, we've come to the point in the lesson where we might begin to wonder, what exactly do we mean by what we think? If what we think matters so much, what do we actually mean by what we think determines who we are? Are we talking about beliefs? Are we talking about values? What is it exactly that we are talking about? And I think the Greek philosopher Plato puts it best in our context. He says that thinking is simply the talking of the soul with itself. In other words, thinking is self-talk. Pause. What do you think? What did you think of when I just said that thinking is self-talk? Did some of you go, uh-oh? Because my guess is if you had a negative reaction to the idea that thinking is self-talk, it comes from this place, that the way that you talk to yourself, you wouldn't want anyone else to hear that. In fact, a lot of us, the way that we talk to ourselves, if we heard someone talk to someone else the way that we talk to us, we would want to fist fight that person. We might be ready to start a rumble if we heard someone talk to someone else the way that we talk to ourselves. And so when we say that you are what you think, we're saying that what you say to yourself is what is ultimately driving who you are becoming. In other words, you prescribe to a large degree what your brain does by what you say to yourself when no one else is listening. And now can you see why thoughts having such a major part on our well-being and who we're becoming can be so problematic? Because you might have these negative, bad thoughts that go completely unchecked. No one else is hearing the conversation that you're having in your head because you know other people wouldn't stand to listen to you talk to the way that you talk to yourself. They would step in. No, that's not right. You're not thinking of this rationally. So these thoughts are happening and no one else knows about them. So therefore they can be very, very destructive. So you actually are prescribing to a large degree what's happening by the way that you talk to yourself. But what's actually happening under the surface? What's actually happening in your brain is that over time, these secret messages that you are telling yourself that you're thinking, they actually cut a groove or wear a path through your brain's cortex. And then the routine and habitual nature of these messages becomes very prominent and they actually achieve a higher priority than other messages. Meaning that the path that you've taken with that negative thought is so well ingrained in you, that's why it's firing off automatically before anything else can be thought. It's what is most ingrained, and it's actually happening physiologically. There's a path being cut in your brain, a neural pathway that's happening that is firing because it's the deepest, most prominent groove in your cortex. Think of it like this. We've had quite a bit of snow already at this point this winter. When you go out and you ride on a snowy road, you don't go over the paths that haven't been yet carved out. You want to find where the tire tracks are. It's the safest, most comfortable ride for you. The same thing is happening in our brains. Our thought patterns become very routine because these paths have been cut and these ruts have been cut, and we want to fall into what's comfortable, and that's what's actually going on in our brain whenever we continue to have these negative thoughts. This actually explains why a lot of negative self-talk in your mind can come back to mind without any effort whatsoever. Your brain is simply letting you travel a path that you have traveled over and over and over. Now, the nice thing about the way that we are wired is that if negative self-talk is so routine and it's happening in quite truly all of us, then the nice thing is that all of these thoughts can fall into nice buckets that we can then study. How do we reverse what's going on? So in this study, for the next 5 weeks after this lesson, you're going to learn the 5 different types of unhealthy self-talk or unhealthy thoughts that are contributing to your lack of health in these different areas. There's 5 different toxic thoughts that I want to introduce to you tonight. The first type of unhealthy talk is what we call unworthy talk. These are thoughts that we have about our failures that many times are fueled by irrational and false guilt. Sometimes we blow it. Sometimes we screw it up. And then we have guilt about that. That's rational guilt. When you get it wrong and you feel bad about it, that's a good emotion to have because it helps you to get it right in the future. But what we're going to see next week in our lesson is that a lot of the guilt that we feel is false guilt. There's something in us that's saying, even when you haven't done something wrong, that something is wrong and you need to feel bad for it. For example, this past weekend, I was hanging out with a friend out in public. We were having a conversation. He was a pastor. I'm a pastor. We're talking about church and our friends from different churches and things. And a guy walks up and stands next to us and goes, "What church are you all talking about?" Now, immediately in my brain, I was sort of triggered by that question. Because immediately in my brain, I said, have we been saying something we shouldn't have said? Why did he ask the question that way? Have I said something about one of my friends in a negative manner and he overheard it and he's here to confront us? My mind starts to spiral. And then as I audit that conversation later in the day, I go, no, we hadn't said anything. In fact, we were praising a lot of different churches and different pastors and friends, but yet my mind immediately went to this false guilt of, what if you've done something wrong? That right there is unworthy talk. The second type of toxic talk is needy talk. These are the thoughts that lead us into people pleasing. This might manifest in your life as your inability to say no to other people, because in your mind, you're thinking, if I tell them no, I'm going to let them down. I've had this issue a lot when it comes to sports. If people want my kids to be involved in different sports and maybe we don't want them to be a part of that, we want to take a break for a season, we always feel guilty for saying no because we want to please them. We want to say yes. We want them to think well of us. And so sometimes we get guilted into saying yes when we really want to say no. So insecure talk is that sort of talk that leads to self-doubt. That's our third toxic type of talk. Insecure talk, self-doubt. I'll give you an example. I've been invited this year to attend a roundtable gathering of pastors from the movement that we're a part of, and it's called the Large Church Roundtable. It's going to be a gathering of the pastors that pastor the largest Church of God congregations in the United States, and it's the first time I've been invited. Now, for everyone that I've told that to, they've all been, man, that's really exciting, that's fantastic, congratulations, what an accomplishment. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, yeah, it's really nice to be invited, but I know I'm going into a room where I don't know a lot of people, and I'm going to have the smallest of the largest churches, and that insecurity begins to creep in, and the self-doubt begins to creep in. And so in 3 weeks from now, we'll be talking about insecure talk and the toll that it can take on you. The fourth type of toxic talk that you might encounter is what's called entitled talk. These are the thoughts where you dodge responsibility for things while holding everyone else around you to very unfair standards. Let me give you a silly example of what this looks like. And as silly as it is, it actually bears a lot of truth. There's times that I'll be driving around a mall or a busy parking lot, and there will be just cars everywhere. And I'll have this quick thought: God, it wouldn't be too much for you to give me a parking spot up close. Why do I have to park all the way in the back? Couldn't just one thing go my way today? It's a silly example, but that's an idea of what entitled talk looks like. The final type of talk that we're going to look at in this series is called unlovable talk. This is the sort of talk that has convinced you that you must earn love. An example of this would be, I previously told you that I had been invited to a gathering of pastors for the largest church of God's in the country. Now, is that a valid example when I used it? Yes. But was there also a little bit of, I want everyone to know that I got invited to that because I'm still operating in a way that I want to impress people. I want people to think well of me. That way, then I'll have worth, I'll have value in their lives. What's happening is I'm buying into the lie of unlovable talk that I need to be a big deal. I need to be successful. I need to earn my way into people's good graces. And so we're going to look at these 5 different types of unhealthy talk over the next 5 weeks that are really going to help us figure out what our primary and secondary issues in regards to our negative self-talk are. And so it's going to be a really helpful thing. Now, you might be listening to those group of 5, and you may think, well, I think one of them I struggle with, or maybe 2 of them I struggle with. And here's the key: why you're not going to want to skip any of these lessons and just do the ones that you think apply to you, is that remember how we said that sometimes these thoughts are so ingrained in us, they're going on autopilot. It's almost as if they're happening unconsciously, which means, as I told you that list of 5, you may actually be affected by more than what you think, and it may be happening unconsciously. So we still need to work the process with all 5 of these if we're going to eradicate these bad thoughts that keep getting the best of us. Now that we have identified the 5 types of unhealthy thoughts, we may have this question: why don't we just stop thinking like that? Why don't we just stop the irrational thoughts? Why don't we kick the irrational guilt and false guilt and the people-pleasing and the pride and why don't we just kick it to the curb? Well, here's what we've come to know in science. You can't just stop thinking a certain thought just because you choose to. There's actually a phenomenon called ironic process theory. It's a psychological phenomenon that occurs anytime you deliberately try to suppress a certain thought. For instance, the Russian novelist Dostoevsky came up with this thought experiment. He said, essentially, that if you try to not think about a polar bear, you're going to continue to think about a polar bear. Like if you tell yourself, don't think about a polar bear, you're just going to continue to think about the polar bear. You can't actually suppress that thought. You're actually going to have to replace it. In fact, they didn't just stay as a thought exercise with Dostoevsky. There was a Harvard scientist that went on to run an experiment where he found people and he said, for the next 5 minutes, just verbalize your stream of consciousness. But while you're doing that, I don't want you to think about a white bear. But every time that you do think about a white bear, take this bell and ring it. What they found out in that study is while these people were meant to be suppressing the thought of a white bear, on average, more than 1 time per minute, the people were ringing the bell saying that they thought about the white bear. This is one of the biggest dangers of self-talk, that it happens so automatically. But one of the other dangers is it's not spoken out loud. These are messages in your mind. It's your inner voice. It's reflective and automatic. And here's what's really dangerous. It occurs without any prior reflection or reasoning. So some of these bad thoughts that you were conjuring up, your brain is not processing them in an irrational way before you think them. And what happens is, whether they're valid or not, the brain receives every one of those thoughts as valid. That means your self-talk doesn't even have to be true. And the mind will still treat it as if it were the gospel itself. And that's why what we think has to be the right things, because our mind's going to treat whatever we think is true. And it's going to cut those grooves, and it's going to affect our mood. And there, we have to do something about it. So no, we can't just stop thinking something on our own willpower. So what is going to be our strategy? Well, what's going to happen is as we identify these negative thought patterns and these 5 toxic ways that we talk to ourselves, each week we'll dive into one of those negative self-talk, what it looks like, and then by the conclusion of the session, we're going to learn tactics that we can replace the negative self-talk with healthy, life-giving messages that can be transformative. In fact, the more that we lean into those sorts of messages, they can then become the dominant thoughts that we have on autopilot. Just imagine the next time that you get that text message, hey, we need to talk. If you have done the hard enough work, your initial thought could be positive and you would keep the dread at bay. No more heart racing, no more clammy palms, and you'll be able to handle the situation, whether good or bad, because you're thinking about it better. That autopilot, auto-triggering thought can actually be positive, because if you will do the work to cut a new groove in your brain's cortex, those can be the dominant thoughts, and that will ultimately lead to you being a happier and healthier you. The fact of the matter is this, that if your brain learned unhealthy patterns, it means that it can learn healthy ones. No, it's not going to be easy. I'm not saying the process of rewiring your brain, literally years and years and years of neuro pathways that you have created. I'm not saying that overriding those with new neuro pathways and new grooves in your brain and new dominant thoughts is going to be easy. But I promise you this, it will be worthwhile. I believe that if you are able to identify this negative self-talk and replace it with the 5 things that we're going to learn over the next 5 weeks, that this could be the year that you finally experience freedom. That this could finally be the year that transformation really happens. Now, for this week, I have a challenge for you. We're not yet to identifying which toxic talks are us and what to do with them. But for this week, I want you to do one exercise. I want you to begin to just take note. Begin to notice how you talk to yourself. What's it sound like? Is it overwhelmingly positive? Is it overwhelmingly negative? What are some of the more startling things that you're saying to yourself that you wouldn't even say to somebody else, but you said it to yourself? Begin to just note, analyze. What is it that I am saying to myself? Because I believe one of the habits we're going to have to get really good at if we're going to rewire our brain in this way is going to be noticing what we say and then having a way to reroute that thought in a different way. It's kind of like what Paul says in the New Testament, that we need to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. So this week, let's work on taking our thoughts captive. Let's work on when that negative thought triggers, let's take notice of it. All right, where did that come from? Why did that come from? How is this affecting me? And let's just see how we're talking to ourselves and see how just a little bit of self-awareness might begin the process of true transformation. We are so excited for you to take this journey with us. I really believe that God has something incredible in store for you, but you have to do the hard work. Show up every week, work the process, do the homework, do whatever is necessary for you to find your true freedom away from these bad thoughts and end up with a thought life that leads to a happier and healthier you.